Good evening, everybody. It is my pleasure to invite all of you to welcome all of you today for yet another edition of our new program, Gyanpedia. Under Gyanadam, we conduct programs related to literature. Today, we are having a program which we have titled A Celestial Affair, a journey beyond the solar system. The speaker for tonight will be Professor Mustafa Lokhandwala. Mustafa Lokhandwala wears many hats. He has a double master's in engineering and has taught in various engineering colleges. He is a corporate trainer, mentor, and life coach. Astronomy is his hobby and passion. He is a former president of Jyotir Vidya Parisanstha, the oldest association of amateur astronomers in India. He has authored 2 books on the subject, Akashatil Lapandav on eclipses in Marathi and Beyond Solar System on cosmology. The starry sky about the program, the starry sky has intrigued and inspired mankind since time immemorial. Stories, myths, legends, poems, superstitions have been built around the stars. Professor Lokhandwala, Mustafa, my good friend, takes us on a journey into outer space without us leaving our homes. Last week, we had a program on the railways, Indian railways, where Apurva Bahadur took us through a journey on railways, on land. Today, we go into the stars, into the sky. Mustafa introduces us the stars and the many romantic, mystical, mythological narratives around them. He opens our eyes to the discoveries of the universe through astronomy, the scientific study of the stars. Professor Lokhandwala takes us beyond the Earth's atmosphere to faraway galaxies and awe-inspiring celestial phenomena. For anyone who has looked up at the evening sky, marveled at the stars, and wondered what lies beyond, this program is a must-watch. A Celestial Affair by Mustafa Lokhandwala. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Farooq, for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas with the audience. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Astronomy has been my hobby for more than 4 decades, and it has always intrigued me, and I've seen it from various perspectives. So without much ado, let's start with my presentation. There we are. This is the famous painting by Vincent van Gogh called as Starry Nights. And this started a whole movement of this thing called as Impressionism. And but it is very interesting because, and if you see all over the world, everybody and anybody, including children, old people, family people, farmers, scientists, poets, philosophers, painters have been intrigued with the sky because there's so much to understand and so much to learn about it. So this is our topic for today, Beyond the Solar System. The idea behind this program is to understand that there is a lot to learn from the sky. But the question that is normally asked for a person like me is, how do you know what is going on? So today what we are going to do is, when we study or when we see, I'm going to take you through a journey of learning how over thousands of years people have learned and set up small things, even when we did not have equipment, how we got into learning about astronomy and about the stars beyond this thing. So when we look up at the sky, we just don't see stars. What we see is, over the last few millennia, people have conveniently set up stars into groups to remember them, because they were used for navigation, they were used for various purposes, even measuring seasons. So these groups are called as constellations. Now, when these constellations were there, they were associated with pictures in mind. Then people associated myths and stories with these constellations. And then it also related to history and legend and all those things. So the idea behind this was to remember the stars so that we can relate to them. Now, one beauty about stars and the sky is that wherever you go in the world, your surroundings change, everything changes. But what does not change is the sky. It remains the same. It's the same friendly sky, which is which makes us makes us feel familiar. You go in deep into the sea, you go deep into the jungle, you go right in the city, and the sky still remains the same. So that's the when you look up at the sky, this is what you see. Now, in the constellations, you have shapes, you have myths, you have star names, you have classification, and then lastly, the smaller stars were accorded in a catalog. So here, what we saw in the last slide was a hunter with a sword and a fleece in the hand, and then the comparative this thing is a constellation. In this thing here, you see the sky as you see it with your eyes, and this now becomes a diagram where the constellation is there. This diagram is then related to a picture around you, and then this is how the whole thing takes place. So these shapes have myths. Like, for example, this is the constellation called Orion, and in this we have a hunter who is followed by his dog. So he has two dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor. And there are myths associated with this, that he's a hunter and he goes for this and that, and how his came up. Then these stars have names. For example, if you see here, all these stars have been given names. This is the brightest of them, and that is Betelgeuse and Rigel. And then there are these three stars, which is supposed to be the belt of Orion. And then if you see, follow the line below that, you come to a star called as Sirius, which is the brightest star in the sky. And that's the beauty. So this is how you tell stories, that this thing. In Indian mythology, this same constellation is called as Mruga. The four major stars on the corner are the legs of the Mruga or deer. The star at this here, this one, is supposed to be the head of the Mruga. And then the brightest star is called as Vyad. And that Vyad shoots an arrow, and these three stars are in the straight line. So it's like the arrow being hit by the hunter. So different cultures have different stories behind it. Now, all constellations, for understanding and classification, are, the brightest star in a constellation is called by the letter alpha, beta, gamma, and so on, in a reducing brightness. Now, what happens is, later on in the 18th century, Flamsteed created a catalog where he named all the, gave number to all the brighter ones, which can be seen with the naked eye. In between, I will have some jokes. In the last few years, we have had lots of satellites. So the scientists say it's not a new constellation, it's a cluster of satellites. So that is one interesting thing. If you, just after the sunset, after half an hour after the sunset, if you are in a dark area and you look up at the sky, you will see artificial satellites. From the dark sky, you can see about 7-8 satellites any day. So that's our own this thing. Now, when we talk about bright stars and dim stars, there is an interesting thing, that how do we classify the stars? So in 134 BCE, Hipparchus classified stars into 6 magnitudes. The brightest ones were called as magnitude 1 star, the dimmest were the magnitude 6 stars. And that's how it happened. Then later on, with a lot of photometry and other things, we were able to actually give it a value where the magnitude is K minus 2.5 logs B, where B is the brightness and M is the, so this is a logarithmic scale. Now, this is one very interesting thing about all human senses, that it is not linear. Our eyes, our hearing are all logarithmic scale. Like, for example, when you have even the sound is in decibels, which is a logarithmic scale. So here we have this thing. So every magnitude of star is roughly 2.5 times brighter than its succeeding this thing. So magnitude 1 is 2.5 times brighter than 2, and so on and so forth. So this is, you don't have to remember the formula, but the concept is very simple. Now we come to an absolute magnitude of a star. But before we do that, I would request the highlight on me. I would request you to do an experiment. I'm sorry, I'll repeat that. So what you would do is put your finger at an arm's length from your eyes. First, close one eye and look at the background of the finger and note where you can see it. Then what you do is open that eye, close the other eye, and see. What you will note is that the two positions are different. You have not moved your finger at all. But then what happens is, it's because there is a distance between the two eyes. And so the finger and the two eyes form a triangle. And then they are projected on different backgrounds. So now this is a concept called as parallax. And I will go back to my slide, show. Yeah, there we are. So what we do is, like, this is a mechanism, parallax is a mechanism used in even survey called as triangulation. And therefore, what we do is, now the distance between the eyes is very small.
It is, you don't have to do it.
The distance between the eyes is very small. So if you have to measure long distances, then what happens is you need a bigger baseline. Now this is the distance between the two eyes is the baseline. For stars, we need a bigger baseline. And therefore, if you see in the lower diagram, when the Earth is moving around the sun, at 6 months apart, it is on two diametrically opposite positions. And therefore, what happens is that the nearer stars seem to move based on the stars on the background, which are dimmer. So how do we know which are nearer stars and which are dimmer stars, which are the further stars? So usually the dimmer stars and the far distance, the brighter stars are near us. And that's how we do that. So this is a mechanism which we measure, and this is called as parallax. Now, if we have to actually measure the distance of a star and the brightness of a star, we have to have a standard measurements. For example, if you take a small candle and keep it, say, a meter away from you, it would be brighter than a street light of 500 watts, maybe 2 kilometers away. So you can't say that the candle is brighter than the street light. And therefore, we have to have an absolute measure of brightness, and that is called as absolute magnitude. So in that case, what we do is we may keep the star, assume that the star is at a distance of 10 parsecs. Now, what is a parsec? So before we understand that, let's understand that the whole circle a whole circle is divided into 360 degrees, right? Each degree is divided into 60 minutes of arc, and each minute of arc is divided into 60 seconds of an arc. So if the parallax is 1 second of an arc, then we call that distance as 1 parsec. It is roughly a little more than 3 light years, which we will come to that again in the distance. So here 10 parsecs does not mean that the angle is 10 seconds, but it is 10 times 1 parsec. So that's how it is. It is 1/10. So here we keep them at an absolute magnitude. So what we do is when we measure stars and we keep them at a distance, then we know that their absolute brightness is different from apparent brightness. So when we use this absolute magnitude, what we see is that there is this law called as the Wien's law, where wavelength shifts. This band that you see from, this colorful band that you see is the visible light, white light that we humans can see. And that is where the study has been there. So some stars, as you will see, the luminosity, the brightest stars are blue in color, and then their brightest point keeps on moving towards the right, and the dimmest stars are red in color. So the color of the star and its surface temperature are related. As you can see in this, the dimmest stars have a surface temperature which is lower, and this thing. And this is a very interesting phenomenon, that the blue stars are hotter than the red stars. In art, the blue color is supposed to be cool and the red color is supposed to be hot. But that's not so in real life. In astronomy, it is exactly the reverse of that. Then over the years, we had all the stars were classified as A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like typically, scientists have a habit of classifying everything. And in the year 1911 and 1913, Hertzsprung and Russell were two scientists in different countries, studied all the stars, put them in the absolute magnitude, and then classified them and made a diagram, which is like this. As you can see, almost 90% of the stars are on this main strip, which is diagonally to be seen there, right? This strip is called as the main sequence, and most of the stars are there. The stars on the left are the blue ones, which are the hottest stars. The hottest stars are about surface temperature of 40,000 Kelvin, and the dimmest stars are about 3,000 degrees Kelvin. And therefore, as you can see, this color classification enables us to understand the temperature. Now, once this was studied, what happened is that the earlier classification went for a toss. That door is making noise. This classification went for a toss, and therefore it had to be rearranged. Now, that became a problem. So the classification from the hottest stars was O, B, A, F, G, K, etc., etc. How do you remember that? So one astronomer, wo raat mein baiठते na, all astronomers are ullu ke patte. They work in the night and sleep in the day, like the owls do. And therefore they defined this. Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me right now, smack. And that became the mnemonic. Other people created other mnemonics, and that is an interesting story in itself, but we will not dwell here much. This is the dangers of dating a scientist. Don't ever do that. You'll fall in trouble. Okay. Now, let's go to the distance of the stars. People say that how is the distance of the stars measured? So the first thing is visual or trigonometric parallax, which we saw a few minutes back, that the two opposite points on the diameter of the Earth's orbit are used to measure this. So this is called as a visual, or trigonometry is used, therefore it's called as a trigonometric parallax. Using this, we can measure roughly about few hundred nearest stars. Beyond that, it becomes useless. But using that, these scientists created this Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, and therefore now we know that color and brightness are related. So using that, we can have spectroscopic parallax. Like, for example, if you have seen on the road, you see that when we have this sodium vapor lamps, a sodium vapor lamp has a certain brightness, but if you see it, say 5 kilometers away, it looks very dim. So if you have a measuring instrument and you know its intrinsic brightness, then you know how much distance it works out to be. So this becomes spectroscopic parallax. And this is one measure of using this. A number of further stars we were able to measure their distances, and this gave us an idea about how the our immediate neighborhood of the solar system looks like. Now, what happens is when we use in our whole lifetime, in our own life, we use measures like centimeters, meter, or whatever, and height and other things. But these measures are no good for astronomical purposes. So the first and the basic unit before scientists were able to establish the distance between the planet and the sun was actual values. It was an astronomical unit. This was the multiple used for measuring the planet. This astronomical unit is the average distance between the Earth and the sun. So we say its short form is AU. Like we say that a planet is so many AUs away from the sun, or maybe a comet is so many AU away from the sun. But then AU also becomes a very small unit when we talk about in terms of distance of the stars. So we have what is called as a light year. A light travels 3 lakh kilometers in 1 second. So it has traveled roughly like 4 kilometers before I complete one sentence. That's a big speed. Imagine that you multiply it by 60, and that distance is the distance it travels in 1 minute. Multiplied by 60 and you get the distance it travels in 1 hour, multiplied by 24 and gives a distance it travels in a day, and then multiplied by 365. Oh my God, big number. मेरे तो ऊपर से जाता है. So most of us find it. But then that becomes a unit that is good enough to measure the distance between the stars. The nearest star, Proxima Centauri, is roughly 4.1 light years away from us. 4.1, 4.2 or something like that. Now, when we go beyond that, even those numbers, like millions of light years, become very big. So we have a parsec. Nowadays, for common people like us, light year is a good enough unit, but scientists use a concept called as parsec, which I mentioned a few minutes back, is 1 parallax second. Now, this is a concept that scientists have used. Nowadays, the shorter units, like up to 1 astronomical unit, you have radar systems which can measure. Now we can measure a very precise distance between Earth and Moon, and Earth and Venus and Jupiter, and not Jupiter, but less than that. Then what happens is, from 1 astronomical unit to about 100 parsec, we can have parallax, which we saw. Then we have the red band where we use spectroscopic parallax. And then we have other mechanisms like the Cepheid variables, planetary nebulas, and types of supernovae. This we will see a little subsequently. So I will not talk about them right now. But that's how we use one set of measures to reach to the next level, then use that, set it up, and then. So when I say that a distance of a star is so many light years away, it is never a precise term, because there is always a margin of error. This reminds me of a joke that I heard a few days back, is that this man goes to Egypt, and there is, he's seeing the pyramids, and that guide tells him, this pyramid is 5,000 years. He says, no, it is 5,003 years old. Then he goes somewhere else, this is 4,000 years. No, it was 4,003 years. He says, how do you know exactly that? I had come 3 years ago and this was the value that was stored. So now you should add 3 years. But that doesn't work. The whole idea being that these are approximate values and you have to take them with a pinch of salt. Now, this is the part of the story of how distances are measured. So you will understand that this was used to measure the structure of our universe in the near aspects. Now let's look at the structure of the stars. Let's understand what it is and how we were able to do that sitting on the surface of Earth. If you all of us have read Newton's discovery of the spectrum, how he broke the light into its constituents using a prism and all that. And then we have Kirchhoff's laws, which we help to understand. Then we have temperature laws, which relate to radiation, called as the Planck's laws, Wien law. You need not understand too much about it. But here in the diagram below, as you see, that there is a band of light in which we can see. On the left is the ultraviolet, which we can't see except without instruments, and on the right is infrared, which we can't see, but except with the use of instruments. But with using the instruments, what we see is that the brighter the star, the peak of that curve is near to the blue end, and it keeps on shifting towards the red end. And this is what gives us the relationship between the color and the spectrum of the radiation, which we talked about, spectral this thing. Then we come to a little bit of understanding the chemical composition. Here, you have to bear with me a little few technical terms. So according to Kirchhoff's laws, you have 3 types of spectrum. The spectra are continuous spectrum, emission spectrum, and absorption spectrum. A body radiating at full temperature shows a continuous spectrum, as we see in case of most bright bodies. Then what happens is a low density cloud of gas will emit only certain colors. Like if you, this is something that you see in case of the mercury vapor lamp or sodium vapor lamp, where only a certain band of light is given. In case of sodium vapor lamp, we get the yellow light, right? Similarly, that is called as an emission spectrum. And then you have an absorption spectrum. You have a source behind you, and then you have a cloud or an object in front of you, and it absorbs certain amount of light. Now, which light is absorbed is defined by which element it is, which elements are present, and therefore this becomes. So all these mechanisms are used to understand the composition of the stars. And for the sun, our own sun, hydrogen is about 70%, helium is about 27%, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, etc. are 2%, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, etc. are 1%, and other. So as you see, it is primarily hydrogen, and that is being converted into this thing. Now, what happens is, historically speaking, we started off with the Earth as the center of the universe, and the sky was some sort of a dome, and there were pinpricks where you could see the divine light coming from behind God's light or whatever. That was the mythology. Then we realized with this guy coming in, Galileo and the other people, it's not the Earth which is the center of the universe, it's the sun. And gradually, as you have seen in history, we have been pushed in the periphery. As we grow up, we realize we are no longer the center of the earth. Like small children think, the whole world revolves around themselves. And as we grow old, we realize, oh no, the world doesn't. And similarly, it has happened in astronomy also. Now, few 100 years ago, people knew only combustion, the burning of coal and other things, chemical combustion. And people thought, they calculated the weight of that and the size of the sun. And they realized, yeah, I mean, the sun would burn for about 5,000-10,000 years. And therefore, there was this bishop who studied the Bible and declared that the world was created in 4000 BC. And that is the universe right now is only 6,000 years old. And when people started questioning, aisa thodi hota hai, you have all these, what do we say, archaeological findings, you have these dead animals being found and all those things in paleontology. People were not willing to accept it and say, if there is no sun, where will this come from? Because at that point of time, people did not know where the energy came from. And that is here we come to the source of energy. So presently, from what we know, the life of the sun is approximately 5 billion years. And obviously, chemical reaction is ruled out. Why is it ruled out? Because life as we know today has existed on this earth for almost 3.5 billion years. And there are relics available for that. Then another mechanism is gravitational collapse. It releases, but then it is a limited phenomenon. The only possibility is nuclear reaction, which is possible where a small amount of mass is converted into energy by this famous equation, which all of us are familiar with, E is equal to mc square. And this is what happens. You have, if you start from left and go towards the right, so two protons come and are hit by a neutron and they form a deuterium, this thing, then it is unstable. One more proton comes and hits it and it becomes a helium atom. Then that helium atom, 3 helium, and then it becomes beryllium. And from there, again, 2 protons are released and you have a 4 helium, this thing. And in that process, a small amount of mass is lost. 4 protons or 4 hydrogens and 1 helium is slightly less than 4 hydrogen. So therefore, that is released as a form of energy. Now, this is, so here we talk about 2 basic, this thing, which is called as a proton-proton reaction, which occurs at a very high temperature, or a carbon-nitrogen cycle where carbon acts as a nuclear catalyst. Just as we have a catalyst in chemical equation which promotes the reaction but does not participate in that. So similarly, here we have carbon which goes into a reaction but comes out again as carbon. So it doesn't take part in the reaction. It just facilitates at a much lower temperature and pressure. So here we come to certain special stars. They are very interesting stars all around. The first are called as visual binaries, stars which are look near to each other, and sometimes they also move around each other. So these are called as visual binaries because they always are seen next to each other. Then there are eclipsing binaries. There is this famous star called as Algol. Historically, it has been called as a Demon star because it continuously, periodically, its brightness keeps on varying. And people thought that demon, there was a fight going on between the star and a demon, and this, demon would eat it up and throw it out. So they are basically eclipsing binaries. And then there is a concept called as spectroscopic binaries, where this thing moves out. Now, here, I would like to share one phenomenon with you, which is important in astronomy. In sound, if you stand on a railway platform and the train is approaching you, what do you see? That the pitch of the sound is high. And then it passes you and goes away from you. and the pitch goes down. Why? Because each succeeding wave that is coming to you is shortened because of the speed of the train. When it is coming towards you, and when it is going away, each succeeding wave comes later. So this is called as a Doppler effect in sound. In light also this happens. So when a body is moving away from you, you see the whole spectrum move towards the red end. And if a body is approaching you, the whole spectrum moves to the blue end. And this is called as a red shift or blue shift. This is an important parameter for measuring how fast the star is moving away from us or towards us. So in eclipsing binaries, especially in the spectroscopic binary, their spectrum keeps on moving from red to blue and blue to red, and therefore you know that they're rotating around the common center. And these are some of the interesting stars. Then there are variable stars. There are variable stars. There are stars which are periodically variable. For various reasons, they are variable. Then there are Cepheid variables. There is this Delta Cepheus star, which was first noted that it had a very precise graph of variation. And there is, when a large number of these Delta Cepheid stars were measured, what we saw was there was a relationship, a linear relationship between their brightness and the period. And therefore, these were useful for measuring distances much larger than what we have talked till now, right? And that is a very important thing. And there are other variables which we will also come to. Then there are stars which explode. इतना गुस्सा हो जाते हैं कि they burst through. So we have some stars which are called as flare stars. Flare stars are stars which basically let out a little bit of matter, and they form a big flame coming out of it. They brighten for a small period, and then that's the end. Then we have nova. Actually, nova is a misleading word. Those stars are already there, but sometimes they become visible to us. They are dim stars which become visible. And therefore, they are called as new stars or nova. And then there are supernovas. Supernovas are huge amount of energy that is given out in an explosion. The energy of probably 100 million stars in one explosion. And that's that big. And this is a picture that you see of a supernova exploding. And sometimes you see the remnants and you can work back and see. Like the Chinese were able to note one star in 1054. And today what we see is in the Crab Nebula is the remnant, a huge cloud, which is almost like 1 light year across. In 1,000 years, it has grown so fast. Then we have quasars, pulsars, and black holes. Quasars are quasi-stellar objects which are very far away, and we don't know exactly what they are still. There is a lot of studies going on in that. Pulsars are stars which keep on pulsating and give out signals in certain directions. These pulsars are also beacon, this thing, and a lot of study has gone into them. We will not go into the details because otherwise this lecture can go on for probably 10 hours. I won't go into that. And black holes are something that a lot of youngsters are interested. Nothing comes out of it. कोई डुबाने वाला रहता है ना बैंक का पैसा, अपन बोलते हैं साला ब्लैक होल है, तो वैसा ही इसका भी रहता है. Why are they called as black hole? It's because their surface, see, all bodies in space have a surface gravity, and there is an escape velocity with which you can get out of the field of gravity. Like for example, if you want to get out of the field of gravity of Earth, it is roughly 11.2 kilometers per second. With bigger bodies, the velocity is bigger. With denser bodies, the surface velocity is bigger. With black holes, the velocity is greater than the speed of light. So even light can't come out of it, and therefore nothing can be seen in that. Until now, we didn't have picture. Last year, we have had a beautiful picture of the black hole being shown. So a little lighter mood about the black hole. So black holes are very intriguing, this thing. There is a lot of theory about it that all matter that falls into it is never to be recovered. And they keep on growing and they keep on eating up everything that comes in their vicinity. But how do we know they exist there? Is when anything that falls into it gives out a lot of heat. Now, when we say we throw a stone from a certain height on the earth, it first has potential energy, then it builds up speed, we call it as kinetic energy, and then when it hits the ground, all that energy is dissipated in form of heat. In case of black holes, the energy that is dissipated is in the range of X-rays. And therefore, Cygnus X was the first object which was considered to be the first black hole possible in our nearest vicinity. Now, in the last century, we have had more options available to us. Up till now, our eyes were the only means of this thing, and we used only light. In the last century, we have started using other things like radio astronomy. In Pune, we have this famous radio array, radio telescope array called as near Khodad on the Pune-Nasik road. And that's a multiple arrays of dishes around there. Then our atmosphere itself is opaque to X-rays because we have what is called as an ionosphere, which does not allow these high energy rays to enter. And therefore, we are today surviving on the surface of Earth. It protects us. And therefore, S-ray had to be used. If we have to use X-ray for measuring, then we have to have a telescope going out in space. So Chandra X-ray telescope was sent into space, and that's how we use that. Then there are other range of spectra like gamma rays, this, that, gamma burst. The latest one is use of gravitational waves. Light interferometer, a gravitational observer is the this thing. And you see here in this diagram, there are two parallel tunnels through which light is passing. They are very precisely measured. Now, when a gravitational wave occurs, the distance between the source of light and this thing, there is an interference created in these two light sources, and that is measured. And that's how in the last few years, and last couple of years only probably, we have been able to measure gravitational waves, especially of two black holes collapsing into each other. The huge amount of gravitational waves that they created was something that we were able to measure. Now, this is an interesting story that we are going to talk about. Life of the star. Here, there are two set of, look at this way. You have seen in real life, thin people survive. Slide. Thin people live longer. Fat people die earlier. So ये stars का भी ऐसा ही होता है. Stars which start with a slow mass have high temperature, low temperature, and the burning takes place over a large amount of time. Whereas big stars grow big very fast, have fast consumption, and then they die fast. Now here, in this case, we have to understand how the stars work. Basically, stars work on two forces. They are stable. They are like huge amount of energy being spilled out. But there are two forces which are balanced. One is the gravitational force which pulls all the mass inwards. Then there is the radiation, the energy which is trying to explode it. So when these two things are in balance, we have what is called as a stable form. And most of the stars on the main sequence are in this stable form. Now, what happens is in the center first, the oxygen starts burning. Once it has burned and become helium, it is like ashes. It is no longer taking part. Then an outer layer starts forming. So here what has happened is gravity is collapsing it and the radiation. So it's like a skins of onion where the radiation and the energy production happens. Gradually, then what happens is the bigger the skin, the greater the amount of energy. And sometimes one of these forces take over. And therefore, if the energy that is being produced is more powerful than the gravity, we have what is called as an explosion. And that's what we saw in those explosive stars here. And sometimes they will become supernova, they'll become a red giant. The red giants are so big that if you were to keep one of these red giants in the position where sun is today, some of the biggest red giants their size would go beyond the orbit of Saturn. They're that big. And the density in these stars is so low that our atmosphere, which we live near the sea level or whatever, comfortable atmospheric pressure, it is less than that. But still they are this thing. So what happens is, how is that defining line called? So it is called as Chandrasekhar limit. It is about 1.3 times the mass of the sun. Below that, gravity is stronger and they will never explode. Much above that, they will explode. So that is called as the Chandrasekhar limit. So in these two forces, which becomes more dominant is decided by the Chandrasekhar limit. And that is what he got the prize for. So we will take a small break. I will invite my friend Farooq to speak a few things, because this has become too much high. Yeah. Over to Farooq. Share that screen here.
So I think Mustafa will. Okay, I wanted to request everybody and remind everybody that Gyanadab has a sister organization called Nityasha Foundation. By conducting these programs under Gyanadab, we attempt to collect donations for Nityasha Foundation. Tushar Shingare will be now putting a banner in front on this screen of ours. And I want to tell you that Nityasha Foundation works for children with type 1 diabetes. Now, these children with type 1 diabetes, they require insulin, they require glucose strips, they require HbA1c testing, they require a lot of support. Each child requires around 30,000 rupees a year for their treatment. And I would request that, can you show slide number 2? Okay, can you go in presentation mode? Okay, now this is where we collect the donation. If you can take your screenshots, then probably you can send any donation you want on this thing. Tushar, can you also show the Give India link? Yeah, okay, this is the Give India link, and either you can take a screenshot of this and send the donation, or put your number down, WhatsApp number down in the chat, and we will send you all the information. And we'll send you all the information for you to donate. So please donate with a great big heart of yours. And I request now Mustafa to continue the program. Remember that we are also live on Facebook. If anybody is having difficulty on Zoom, they can join us on Facebook. Tushar will again give you the Facebook link in case you want. Thank you. And Mustafa, please continue.
Yeah. Thank you, Farooq. For all my friends in the audience, I would request you to take this request seriously from Farooq and they're doing amazing work in the field of this thing. So type 1 diabetes, and that's an amazing thing to do. So we continue with the presentation. Now we go to various types of clusters of stars. Some stars are loners, some stay in gangs, and some stay in groups, some stay in villages, some stay in cities, and therefore the various combinations, just like human. So here on the left, we have what is called as an open galactic cluster, and on the right, we have a globular structure. A globular cluster would be something like few thousand light years across this picture. And there would be thousands of stars very closely associated with the beehive is one example of this. Then we come to this concept of nebula. And though right now this word is very precisely used, earlier it was used in a loose form. In 1784, a French scientist called Messier classified 104 cloud-like objects. Why did he do that? is because he was a comet hunter and he wanted to hunt comets. So he did not want to mistake his search for comets by this thing. So he created a catalog and he just classified 104. In 1888, Dreyer classified 7,840 and it is called as NGC, New General Catalog. So Messier objects are called as M1, M2, M3, etc. And Dreyer's classification is called as NGC 1, 2, 3. Later on, with the advent of telescopes and other things, we found that these nebula, cloud-like structures, were having different structures. So here, let's look at some of these beautiful structures. This is a nebula. This is a reflection nebula, where the light from the stars around is lightening up the gas around the star. So this is called as a reflection nebula. Then you have a dark nebula. A dark nebula blocks the light from behind. Too much of dirt and debris in the space. This is the famous Horsehead Nebula that you would see. Looks like that horse on a chessboard. Then you have Planetary Nebula. This is a very popular one in astronomy. Some people associate it with, it looks like an eye of a human being. So this is a Planetary Nebula. It means that there is a ring around a central explosion. If you see, there is a central star here. Probably it has exploded and it has created this, and it is reflecting the light of this thing, the central star. And therefore it looks like a planetary arrangement, like Saturn with rings around itself. So that's why it is called as a Planetary Nebula. This is a supernova remnant. If you remember, some time back I had mentioned that in 1054, the Chinese recorded that there was a supernova which happened, which grew so bright that it was almost competing with the moon. And they have recorded it. And now in the same place, wherever that history has been written, and they had given some dimension, this was found, and this is called as a supernova remnant. And at different light or different spectrum, it gives a different pictorial this thing. And the field across the nebula is more than a couple of light years across. This is another interesting phenomenon which has happened in the last few years. They're called as extrasolar planets. Now here, this is very important to understand what are the mechanisms used. In 2004, we had the transit of Venus, and this was the first transit of Venus in the days of technology. So what we were able to do is put up light meters and measure how the brightness dropped and how much. And therefore, using that mechanism, we could detect a number of planets. Then other methods also came up. There is this radial velocity, transit photometry, Kepler Space Telescope does that. Now we know about 4,000 or so. So since 2004 to now, in the last 16, 17 years, we have been able to detect 4,000 planets outside the solar system. And that is a very important part of our understanding. So probably these are the planets where there is a possibility of possibility of life in another place, in another planet. So there is what is called as the Goldilocks zone. A zone in which it's not too hot for life to survive. It is not too cold for life to survive. So it's just right enough. That's why that story of Goldilocks, father's porridge was very hot, mother's porridge was very cold, the baby's porridge was. So that's why it is called as the Goldilocks zone. And in the Goldilocks zone, probability of life exists. Life. So let's look at some of this. Okay, we will now move on to something which is bigger than this thing. We have finished 55 minutes. In 1784, Herschel studied the distribution of stars and found that the boundary was finite. The Milky Way has a diameter of 1 lakh light years, and our sun is 30,000 light years away from the center. So if you notice, right in the beginning, I had mentioned that we started with the Earth as center, then we realized the sun is the center of the universe then, and then we keep on moving away. Now in this, we find that we are not even in the center of galaxy. It takes about 20 crore years to go around once its own center, and that's how everything in the universe is dynamic. Nothing is stationary. There is no fixed center, and therefore everything is moving. So this is a picture of our galaxy. Imaginary, of course, it's an artist's conception. You have the galaxy bulge in the center. It's like an omelette with the egg in the center. Lots of stars around, and then there are arms around that, and there are open clusters in the space. As you can see, globular clusters form a halo around the galaxy, and there are nebulas and this and that. And our sun is somewhere, it's a medium-sized star. It's not the brightest, it's not the dimmest. It's a medium grade, M grade star with the surface temperature of about 6,000 degrees Kelvin. And this is the whole range of the galaxy is 30 parsecs, which means about 1 lakh kilometers. And that's how it is. And we are about 8 parsecs, about 30,000 light years away from the center.
So 1 lakh light years.
1 lakh light years is the diameter of our galaxy.
Correct.
And our sister galaxy, the nearest galaxy, which is about 2.5 lakh light years away from us, the Andromeda galaxy, looks very similar to us. But being inside it, it is very difficult to understand the structure. We have hardly been able to leave the solar system. Forget going to the stars. We are just taking the first baby steps in space. And therefore, all this requires us to understand and study and visualize while sitting here on the surface of the Earth. Now, we come to the last part of our story, the extragalactic universe. Now, what happens is in the 20th century, with the discovery of Cepheid variables, which I mentioned sometime back when I was talking about variable stars, in the Andromeda galaxy, we realized that it was not just a cloud, it was very far off outside the Milky Way galaxy, and that suddenly changed. Till then, we were thinking that the the Milky Way itself is the universe. Then we realized, oh my God, there's a huge amount of galaxies outside. The nearest galaxies are the Magellanic Clouds. You can't see them in India, but if you happen to go to Australia, do see it. There are 17 galaxies in our neighborhood and is called as a local group. Galli ke ladke bolte na waisa type. But that's how it is, because once we go to the next step, we will realize how big this is. Like, for example, our own Milky Way has roughly 200 to 400 billion stars. Now, I'm sure most of us would find like, oh my God, ye kitna bada number hai. I can't even visualize it. Let's do a small exercise for that. There are 8 billion people on the planet. If we assume that there are 400 billion stars in the Milky Way, each of us gets 50 stars in our kitty. And those 50 stars are, each one of us, it need not be just, the richest people or whatever. And then it comes with its own planets, satellites, whatever. And we are stuck with talking in terms of square feet on the Earth. So that's how it is. We come back to the presentation mode. And that is the amount of size of the galaxy, 1 lakh kilometers in diameter with billions of stars. The billion numbers have to be understood in human context. I have tried to put it in human context, but then Then this Edwin Hubble in the middle of 20th century came and classified just as Hertzsprung Russell had classified the stars, this guy classified the galaxies. So there are ellipticals, there are spirals, and there are barred spirals. And each of them have a certain brightness, intrinsic brightness. So knowing the nature of the galaxy, we would be able to identify what would be its size. And once you know that, using the same parameters for measuring their distances, we have been able to measure the whole universe. The closest so again, we use the same measurement that we use for the stars. We use a step-by-step approach to measure the distances. So the closest 50 galaxies are measured by Cepheid variables. This helps us to classify them. Then we use the further galaxies. One very interesting thing that he discovered, Hubble, was that once we go beyond our local group, then all the galaxies are moving away from us. We see them redshifted. The further the galaxy is, the dimmer the galaxy is, the bigger the redshift, which means that the universe is expanding. And therefore, we have this, the velocity which they are, the v is the velocity which is expanding. H is the constant which we call as the Hubble's constant, and d is the distance. Now here, over the life of a universe probably, which we will come to, about 13 and a half to 15 billion years, humans have been with technology for maybe a few years, a few hundred years, and therefore we are seeing a very small snapshot. So we don't know whether really h is a constant or is it an accelerating value or a decelerating value. So therefore, there is no way for us to understand that. But this is what we see today. Nice joke on expanding universe. But the universe is expanding and it is growing bigger. Now, what happens is we feel that again we are at the center of the universe, and therefore, that's a feeling that comes to us obviously, but it is not true. Imagine you have a balloon and you mark a number of dots on it, and you blow the balloon. All dots will move away from other dots with an increasing speed as you blow the balloon. Does that mean that any one of them is the center? No. So similarly, we are still not in the center of the universe. So this is one very important principle that has come to us in the 20th century. We call it the cosmological principle. It is that there are a few things. First is homogeneity. On the largest scale, the universe has the same physical properties throughout the universe. The extent of the universe that we see today in any directions is roughly about 13.8 billion light years. Okay, so here this is what we call as homogeneity. The density is the same, everything is the same. Then we have a next property called as isotropy, which means that on the largest scale, whichever direction we look into, the universe is the same, everything is the same. And universality is the third principle. Laws of physics are the same everywhere in the universe. These three principles is something that we have been able to discern and understand in the last few years. So cosmology marches on. The question is, where did it all come from? Continues. And whichever, I think it will go on because human curiosity is insatiable. So here we come to the next part, is the structure of the universe. Till the days of my college, or maybe a few years back, there were two conflicting theories. One was called as the Big Bang theory, and the other was a steady state theory. The steady state theory said that though the universe is expanding, some amount of mass is automatically produced and the density remains the same as you see over millennia or even billions of years. But the Big Bang theory said no. Now, what happens is there had to be a resolution to this conflict, and therefore the Big Bang theory walas proposed that if there was a Big Bang, there would be some amount of remnant radiation still available. In 1978, this was found, the cosmic background radiation, COBE as it is called, and it was found to have a temperature of 2.7 something degrees Kelvin, which is very cold, but nevertheless it is found uniformly all over the universe, and therefore steady state theory fell away and Big Bang theory became accepted. So we come to the grand end of the story. We know, as I was telling you, that we are right now here. We know how fast the universe is expanding at this point of time. We don't know whether it will accelerate and become bigger, much bigger, whether the speed will increase or whether it will remain the same, or whether it will the gravity will take over and come back to the same point from where it started, the Big Bang. And so that is called as an oscillating universe, an ever expanding universe, an accelerating. So here right now we are searching for clues for that. Dark matter, dark energy are the keywords that are being probed. And I hope then that this will be this thing. I think this is the end. I would now like to take questions if there are any.
So,
You found
Mustafa,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, I think there are many questions, and in the Q&A, I will take one by one, so you can
Yeah.
answer. I will read it from this. The first question was by Atish Jain. What is 1 AU? I think you already replied that.
Yeah.
Okay. The second question is again by Aryan. Absolute magnitude is the true magnitude at a fixed distance, right? Is it right?
You're
Absolute-
right. That is 10 parsecs distance.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, then Mr. Kumar has written that later on, can we get a copy of the PPT that Professor is using? Of course, you can get a copy of the PPT. Just put your WhatsApp phone number in the chat box, and we'll be sending you the recording of today's program. Am I right? Mustafa will be sharing the program.
Absolutely no issues.
Okay. Now, Sanjay Saxena has said that Sanjay Saxena is our very good friend who took part for the Kaifi Azmi program from Gurgaon, Delhi. He is asking, what, if any, has been the contribution of astronomers of ancient India to astronomy? Did they come up with any significant insights or discovery? In short, were Indian astronomers of the BCs contributing to the astronomy of today? That's the question.
Yes, a lot of our astronomers, Indian astronomers, have given a lot of contribution to that, like our amazing calendar system. We have right from Varamir to Aryabhat who have contributed to Indian astronomy. But like today, we have astronomers and we have astrologers, what is called as pseudoscience. So we had that also in those days. We had astronomers like Varamir and Aryabhat, and we had astrologers like, what do you call it, Bhrigu Samhita. So that was the pseudoscience part of it. This problem continues even now between astrology and astronomy.
Okay, so I think there are a lot of questions from Mr. Atish Jain. I will suggest that I send your email ID to Atish Jain so that you can answer him. Very technical questions, but I need to ask anybody, some other people. They're saying, how many stars in the solar system? Somebody has asked. Now you have answered what it is. Somebody has written something like 70 plus 27 plus 20 plus 1 plus 1 is equal to 101. I don't know why they have done this. Yeah, so I don't know.
I don't get it. So
Yeah, it
again,
doesn't matter. I think which is it's written anonymous, so I don't know which is
Hey,
the nearest
Farooq.
galaxy. Ansar Ansari is asking.
hmm,
Which is the
Hey,
nearest?
Farooq, by the way, just the 101, he was trying to add up all the helium plus
Acha,
hydrogen plus everything. And there are decimals. I think Mustafa has just rounded them up. So the addition is coming 101 instead of 100. It's because it's approximate.
Mustafa, that's Sandeep Prakash Bede for you, your very close friend.
yeah, Sandhi, thanks for the heads up. Actually, yes. I mean, if I get into the decimal parts, it becomes so complicated,
True friend.
and it does not remain a speech for lay persons. And that is why I have kept myself restricted to round figures, approximate values. The whole idea behind was not to get into technicalities, but into concepts.
Yeah.
And I hope that has been satisfied.
So I request now, Sandhi, can you just sort of help our audience sum up what Mustafa has said and some few words from you, because you're also very good in astronomy. Sandhi is my friend from Portland. So today he has joined us from Portland. And Sandhi and Mustafa know each other from Ferguson days. So Sandhi, please, can you speak?
Actually, Sandhi has introduced me to astronomy, and I'm very thankful for that too. 40 years ago, he took me to Jyotirvidya Parisamstha, and he went away to US and, yahan latka ke gaya mujhe. So, Sandhi, please, I would request you to come and speak on that.
Now, first of all, I think when Mustafa is taking my name, he's just being very modest. I think we were together on a common journey, and I think Mustafa has taken it much farther and has stayed center. But let me give you a quick impression. I think this was one of the best presentations, very pictorially, artistically, beautifully catching presentation. And I always like to think astronomy is a subject that should be taught every day in school. I think in this modern world, we have become so selfish. We think we are it. We don't need father, mother, friends. I can do everything. The older you get, you realize, hey, you are not the center of the universe. You are really dependent on host of other people around the universe that defines your existence. I think it's important for kids, this is my urge to all parents, to take their children out on the countryside and actually make them see how beautiful the world looks. From Pune or Mumbai, you probably see 10 stars of bright magnitude, but that's not the universe. You go outside 30, 40 kilometers into a remote village, and when you look at the Milky Way, it literally feels like the stars are falling on you. There are billions and billions, and that's there, and then you realize you are nobody. You are even smaller than the speck of dust. And that's when all your egos of your self-centeredness falls off. I think this is what children in the future need to realize, that they are not it. They are only a part of a very big complex here. The second point I want to mention is, I think the detail with which Mustafa outlined and opened up with simple concepts, sprinkling it with just enough equations, so that I'm sure it must have intrigued people. They would like it is my wish that they actually go out and read and think and read even more. There are plenty of clubs, Jyotirvidya Parisamstha, if you can join. They have stargazing programs, and people are very enthusiastic to be able to help you if you have any questions. This tends to be a very a loving community, that people are interested in giving their knowledge to the youngsters. So put your children or grandchildren, in our case, into those institutions where they will learn a lot. But just to summarize, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Amazing graphics. I want to thank Farooq to put this presentation in front of so many other people. And the last but the least, but all this is being done for Natasha Foundation. So please help out as you gain knowledge, gain a little knowledge and hand over a little bit to the people who need it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak a few words.
Very well put, Sandeep. Sandeep, and it has been a pleasure to have you. Getting a heads up from you is a very amazing experience for me. You have been such an old friend and an astronomy enthusiast. Thank you very much. As he rightly said, Jyotirvidya Parisamstha has, except for the rainy season, we have a monthly star party in a dark area where you can see the sky and you can do this. We can have more programs with Gyanpedia for various other topics of astronomy. And thank you, Farooq, for giving me this opportunity to present.
So you have answered Apurva's question. He had asked Professor Lokhandwala, do you conduct guided outings, which is the nearest place to Pune that has a clear view to the sky? Now, all these questions from the chat, I will be sharing with Mustafa. Some people have asked, are there some good books you can recommend for astronomy? I think, I'm sure, Mustafa, you can answer that and we'll reply to all the people in Gyanpedia. What we are finding is that because this is the second program of Gyanpedia, finding a lot of people eager to learn things, and it looks like we can make this into a small community around Gyanadab under Gyanpedia, and we can take up very interesting subjects on this. Like last week, we had a program on the Indian railway system. Today, we had an astronomy. I am trying to organize a program on tigers. There are some people who specialize in wildlife photography and many more programs. And we are thinking of setting up a WhatsApp group only for knowledge sharing, not for anything else, only for knowledge sharing, as we have said. There are programs, Mustafa, we are planning to do on the postal system, on how tea was discovered and introduced in India. So I think we have completed quite a lot of time on this program. So, Mustafa, do you have anything more to say? Do you want to add anything to the audience at the end?
No, there are lots of books and there is a lot of material available on the net. NASA and ISRO have beautiful sites where they have projects and other things for school children, for college students, internships, a lot of things happening in, and I know a lot of people who started with our association as volunteers, or what do you say, amateurs, and then later on went on to become professional astronomers. We have had a lot of such, my friends and colleagues and other students who have done that. So it's a very interesting career too.
Okay, so to all the people in the audience, I am giving you my number. So if anybody wants to join this Gyanpedia WhatsApp group or the Gyanpedia program under Gyanadab, please send me a WhatsApp message and we will start enrolling into the Gyanadab WhatsApp group. And there are 2-3 people who have raised their hands, but apparently they have left the, this one is Tapan. Tapan, do you want to speak something because you have raised your hand? And Manoj Kumar. Tapan, would like to say anything? Or Manoj Kumar? I think they have just raised the hand. So I think we have some people asking questions, but I will share the question. Yeah?
Hello, Manoj here.
Manoj, please speak.
I want the number and the address of Jyotirvidya Sanstha.
Okay. I have given my number on the chat group. That is my number. That is 9823010962. Please send a WhatsApp message to me. I'll see that you get all the answers. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So please take down my number is 9823010962. I will repeat 9823010962. So please send me a WhatsApp message. All the information I will send you And moment we have the WhatsApp group running, we'll see that all the questions are answered on this. So I would like to formally thank Mustafa for taking out his time and prepping himself for this program. He's a very busy man. He does hundreds of things. He's a teacher by nature and a very good professor. This program was in great detail. It was not for kids. It was a program for senior people. Many of the things we were taught in school and college and we never took it interest. तो तारे देख लिए मुझे astronomer बनना है बाकी उसके बाद भूल गए. But Mustafa has brought us back from the childhood when we used to sit outside. There was no pollution. We used to watch the stars. Sometimes we used to see some falling stars. God knows what was the thing. So
I have a suggestion for Mustafa. Mustafa, you better answer all these questions really fast because two things are happening. The sun is turning into a red giant pretty soon, and we are going to be all engulfed. So you better make sure that to answer all your questions before that. The second thing is the Andromeda galaxy is coming towards us. We are on a collision course and we are all going to be annihilated pretty soon. So you better answer all those questions from people as soon as possible.
Doomsday
You
prediction.
want to do it now or later? Maybe we can have another discussion session.
Later. So I would request that Sandhi, thank you very much. And Mustafa, I would like to say good night to all of you. And Shabba Khair, and in future we'll try to bring some very interesting programs under Gyanpedia. In future, Gyanadab is going to come out with a program on Pakiza, the film. We are also going to do some musical programs just to lighten up the environment, and then again a good knowledge-based program. So I hope everybody has enjoyed. There were more than 125 people today, and it's a good thing. Our whole program is on Facebook. Go on Gyanadab Facebook, and you'll be able to locate our video. And by Monday evening or Tuesday, this program will be recorded and put on YouTube page of Gyanadab. And when you are going on Facebook or on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe. We also have a website called gyanadab.org. In the archives, we'll be putting the whole program's review and the link. You can go there and be able to do it. So thank you very much. And Shabba Khair, good night. Have a good weekend. Thank you very much.
Good night. May the stars be with you.
Chalo,